It is, it's genuinely fascinating how our brains just permanently categorize certain companies based on like a single interaction.
Oh, for sure.
Like if I say the name Equifax to you right now, there's very specific image that probably pops into your head. You picture that moment, maybe once a year
Yeah.
when you log onto a website to get your free weekly credit report.
Right. Just checking the box.
Exactly. You picture this static three-digit number that essentially acts as a gatekeeper. It's the thing telling you if you can buy a house or finance a car or, maybe even just rent an apartment.
Yeah, it governs a lot.
It really does. And we have this collective tendency to view the company as a sort of giant bureaucratic filing cabinet, just this passive warehouse filled with our past financial mistakes and victories.
Yeah, that perception is definitely anchored in that consumer-facing reality.
Yeah.
But the modern financial landscape has evolved so rapidly that the whole filing cabinet model is, well, it's entirely obsolete today.
Obviously.
Well, when we look at the actual infrastructure securing the digital economy, it resembles a high-stakes, real-time battleground, much more than like a static archive.
Mm.
The tools operating behind the scenes, they aren't just checking to see if a utility bill was paid on time 30 days ago.
Right.
They're actually engineered to establish absolute, mathematically undeniable digital trust. And they have to do it in a matter of milliseconds every single time a transaction is initiated.
Wow. And that is exactly why we are pulling back the curtain today.
Yeah.
We're looking at a really comprehensive stack of sources detailing Equifax's business identity and fraud services platform. And our mission for this deep dive is to look way past that familiar consumer-facing credit report.
Which is just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Exactly. We want to uncover the massive hidden business-to-business machinery, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, and this real-time data orchestration that operates, entirely in the background of almost every digital move you make.
Because the threats that businesses face today, whether we're talking about a major online retailer, a local credit union, or a massive telecommunications network, those threats have evolved incredibly far past simple identity theft.
Right.
The days of a criminal simply stealing a physical credit card and, running up charges at an electronics store, that's almost quaint compared to the current threat vectors.
Quaint is a good word for it. It's like comparing a pickpocket to a cyber cartel.
Precisely. The sophistication of financial fraud has scaled exponentially, running right parallel to the digitization of our lives. The moment a business opens its digital doors to consumers, it is simultaneously exposed to this highly organized global network of bad actors.
And these aren't just like isolated guys in basements anymore, right?
No, not at all. They're using automated systems, bot networks, algorithmic probing. They're constantly testing for any structural vulnerability in a company's onboarding process.
Okay, so if traditional identity theft is just, someone stealing your wallet, the source material introduces a concept that completely flips traditional fraud detection on its head.
Yes.
It's something called a synthetic identity. And I have to admit, the mechanics of this threat are genuinely unsettling.
It's definitely a darker side of the tech.
Because we aren't talking about a stolen identity anymore, we're talking about a completely fabricated one. I like to think of a synthetic identity as sort of a digital Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks. Yeah, you have these fraudsters operating essentially as mad scientists. They don't want to steal an existing person's life because, well, a real person will eventually notice the fraud and alert the authorities. Right.
Right. The real person checks their bank app and shuts it down.
Exactly. So instead, they take a fragment of real data, usually a real social security number. Maybe it belongs to, like, a young child who doesn't have a credit file yet, or perhaps someone who is deceased.
Right. They isolate that single legitimate identifier to use as the foundation.
Yep. And then the stitching begins. They attach a completely fake name to that real social security number. They bolt on an address, but it's not a real home.
It's an empty lot or an abandoned building, yeah.
Or a commercial mail drop. Then they generate a burner phone number and a fresh email address. And once all those pieces are stitched together, they jolt it to life by applying for credit.
They have successfully created a ghost.
A literal digital ghost.
Yep.
A person who simply does not exist in the flesh and blood world, but who suddenly has a footprint in the financial system.
And that digital Frankenstein analogy captures the mechanical nature of the crime perfectly. Because the fundamental reason this specific type of fraud is so dangerous and why it bypasses older security protocols is that to a traditional rules-based system, all the individual isolated pieces appear completely legitimate.
Because the pieces are real on their own.
Exactly. The Social Security number passes a basic syntax check because it was issued by the government. The address resolves to a real geographic location in a postal database. If a business is just running a simple vertical checklist, checking off the boxes one by one, the synthetic identity walks right through the front door without triggering a single alarm.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because the scale of this problem is where it gets truly alarming. When we look at the data provided in the sources, in the year 2024 alone, Equifax screened 22.4 million U.S. applications.
A massive volume.
Huge. And out of those, a massive 4% were flagged as synthetic identities.
Yeah.
4% might sound like a minor fraction, but mathematically, 4% of 22.4 million is nearly 900,000 ghost applications.
It's staggering.
That is an absolute army of fabricated profiles trying to secure credit cards, personal loans, vehicle financing, even applying for government benefit programs. So what is the actual real-world impact of stopping these ghosts?
Well, the potential financial devastation from those 900,000 ghosts successfully infiltrating the system is immense, because the behavior pattern of a synthetic identity is inherently a long con.
It's not a smash and grab.
No, not at all. Once the fraudster successfully creates the account, they act like a model citizen. They might use the new credit line to make a very small, mundane purchases, a cup of coffee, a streaming subscription.
It's normal stuff.
Right. And they consistently pay those small balances off in full, month after month. The entire goal is to build up the credit limit on this ghost profile. They patiently nurture it for months, sometimes years.
So they're essentially farming trust.
Exactly.
They are tricking the algorithm into thinking this ghost is highly responsible, so the bank just keeps raising the credit limit, $5,000, $10,000, maybe up to $30,000.
And once that available credit threshold reaches a high enough point, the fraudster executes what the industry calls a bust out.
A bust out.
Yeah, they systematically max out the available credit lines across all the synthetic profiles they control, extracting the funds in cash or high-value goods, and then they simply disappear.
Wow. And the financial institution is just left holding an empty bag.
Completely. They attempt to recover the funds, but, you cannot send a collections agency after a person who was never born. The financial loss is total and unrecoverable.
Man. So catching them at the initial application stage isn't just like a best practice, it is the absolute only viable defense.
It really is. And looking ahead to 2025, Equifax analyzed 37 million U.S. adult identities, and their synthetic identity risk solutions actively deterred $96.4 million in losses from confirmed synthetic identities.
That is a massive amount of money saved. But this brings up a huge operational question. If all the individual data points look real on paper, how does the B2B machinery actually spot the ghost? What is the actual mechanical process of catching something that is designed to look perfect?
It requires a fundamental shift in how data is analyzed. You have to stop looking at the individual pieces of data in a vacuum, and you start analyzing the complex relationships between the data points.
Like looking for the seams on Frankenstein's monster?
Exactly. The detection engine is asking dynamic questions.
Mm-hmm.
Does this newly created email address have any historical footprint of being associated with this specific mobile device?
Okay.
Or does this Social Security number have an activity timeline that makes logical sense for the stated age of the applicant? If the SSN belongs to a 5-year-old, but the application claims 10 years of employment history, the relationship fractures.
Ah, I see. You're mapping the invisible connective tissue. It reminds me of looking at the shadows that an object casts rather than just staring at the object itself.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
Because you might see 50 completely different applications, right, with 50 different names and Social Security numbers. But the real-time data orchestration reveals they're all originating from the exact same IP address. Or the same device ID over a single weekend.
Yes. The puzzle pieces suddenly form a picture of organized fraud. And that level of multidimensional analysis requires an incredibly complex real-time orchestration of data drawn from multiple disparate sources. It is really the only way to conclusively determine that the profile lacks the organic, slightly messy data footprint that a real human naturally generates over a lifetime.
Okay, so if a synthetic identity is a fabricated person pretending to be real, the logical next step in the evolution of financial threats is, well, a real, verified person who simply intends to act like a fraudster.
The inside threat.
Yeah. And the source material dives deep into this. We are moving away from spotting fake profiles and into the territory of predicting when a legitimate flesh and blood consumer is going to break the rules.
Yes, first-party fraud.
First-party fraud. And I have to push back on the underlying premise here.
Please do.
Because, okay, catching a synthetic identity relies on spotting structural anomalies, right? A mismatched timeline, an unnatural velocity of applications. Those are objective data errors.
True.
But claiming that a business can predict if a real verified person, someone with a legitimate financial history, is going to suddenly abuse their credit line and intentionally default before they have even committed the act.
I know how it sounds.
It sounds like we are entering the realm of financial pre-crime. I mean, how is this not just aggressive algorithmic guessing that risks penalizing regular people for, say, sudden life changes or financial emergencies?
It's a very fair point, and it's a vital distinction to make because first-party fraud is incredibly difficult to isolate.
I bet.
We are talking about situations where a real consumer, using their own true identity, obtains goods, services, or funds with the premeditated intention of never paying for them.
Like planning to falsely claim the item never arrived?
Exactly. Or exploiting a known loophole. And to combat this without unfairly penalizing consumers experiencing genuine financial hardship, Equifax developed a solution called credit abuse risk.
Okay.
And to address your concern about guessing, the system is fundamentally built on mathematically rigorous patterns. It specifically relies on what the source material identifies as a gradient boosting methodology.
I saw that exact phrase in the text gradient boosting.
Right.
And from analyzing the context, my understanding is that this isn't just like a single AI model making a broad prediction.
No, not at all.
It reads more like a cascading sequence of micromodels where the system is constantly learning from its own specific blind spots. Am I interpreting the mechanics of that correctly?
You have hit on the exact mechanism that gives the model its power. Think of it as an iterative learning process.
Right.
The initial algorithm makes a prediction on a transaction.
Okay.
If it's slightly inaccurate, it analyzes precisely why it failed. Perhaps the initial model didn't weigh the user's velocity of recent address changes heavily enough against their historical payment cadence.
Oh, I see. So the subsequent model is then built specifically to correct the exact isolated error.
Yes.
It zeroes in on the previous mistake. So the second model is hyper-focused on the relationship between address changes and payment cadence.
Exactly. And gradient boosting layers thousands of these hyper-specific, highly calibrated microcorrections on top of one another.
Thousands of them.
Thousands. The result is an incredibly potent, highly accurate predictive engine that doesn't just guess intent, but actually identifies behavioral patterns that statistically align with premeditated credit abuse rather than normal financial distress.
Wow.
Furthermore, this engine is fed by unique FCRA-regulated data insights.
Right. FCRA standing for the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So we are talking about highly regulated, consumer-permissioned financial data.
Yes, exactly.
This isn't an algorithm scraping a user's social media posts to guess if they are trustworthy. It's grounded in concrete, regulated financial behavior.
And what's fascinating here is that this specific, highly advanced predictive power is the invisible scaffolding that allows our modern, frictionless financial conveniences to exist in the first place.
Like what?
Well, the prime example of this is the explosion of buy now, pay later, or BNPL services.
Oh, yeah. We see that everywhere now. You go to an online retailer to buy like a $400 jacket. You reach the checkout screen, and instead of just entering a credit card, there's a prominent option offering to split the cost into 4 payments of $100 with 0 interest.
Exactly. And the entire value proposition of BNPL relies entirely on a frictionless customer experience. The consumer clicks the button, and they expect instantaneous approval.
Right. If it takes 10 minutes, they're just going to close the tab.
Exactly. But operating behind that instant approval is a massive inherent risk for both the retailer and the BNPL provider. If they blindly approve every single applicant to maintain that frictionless experience, the default rates from consumers who never make that second or third payment will bankrupt the service.
So the business needs to instantly separate the reliable consumer from the first-party fraudster without making the reliable consumer fill out like a 20-page application.
Precisely. The only way the BNPL sector can scale responsibly, promoting positive consumer outcomes without absorbing catastrophic default risks, is by utilizing a predictive tool like the credit abuse risk score.
In real time.
In the absolute milliseconds between a consumer clicking Buy Now and the confirmation screen loading, that gradient-boosting AI has evaluated the regulated data footprint, processed the microcorrections, determined that the consumer's behavior patterns do not align with historical markers of first-party fraud, and transmitted a signal to the merchant that it is safe to proceed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because exploring all this immense back-end technology brings up a massive operational tension.
Oh, absolutely. The friction problem.
Right. If businesses are actively deploying heavy-duty AI, real-time data orchestration, gradient-boosting behavioral analysis, and synthetic identity relationship mapping just to process a single transaction, how is the digital economy not paralyzed by security hurdles?
It's a delicate balance.
Because we all know the deep frustration of trying to quickly log into an account only to be forced to solve multiple image captchas, wait for a text message code, verify an email link, and jump through endless hoops.
Finding the traffic lights.
Yes, finding the crosswalks. If the security net is drawn this incredibly tight, doesn't it fundamentally ruin the customer experience?
That exact tension is the core dilemma driving the evolution of the digital economy. Is an unrelenting balancing act. If a platform's security parameters are too loose, automated bot networks and synthetic identities will drain the capital.
Right.
Conversely, if the security parameters are wound too tight, the friction becomes intolerable. Legitimate consumers will simply abandon their digital shopping carts, close the application, and immediately migrate to a competitor offering a smoother experience.
So to visualize how this problem is actually solved, I think we have to stop looking at security as like a massive steel vault that locks everyone out equally.
Okay.
The ideal system described in the sources functions much more like a highly trained VIP bouncer at an exclusive venue.
Oh, I like that.
The bouncer's primary directive is to strictly keep the bad actors out, identify the fabricated IDs, and intercept the troublemakers.
Right.
But, and this is the vital function of the role, when a recognized VIP walks up to the entrance, that bouncer needs to identify them instantly from a distance. They unclip the velvet rope and let the VIP walk straight through the doors without breaking their physical stride.
They don't pat them down.
Exactly. The bouncer does not pat down the VIP. They do not stop them to interrogate them about their intentions.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the goal of modern identity orchestration. In the Equifax ecosystem, that bouncer role is fulfilled by a comprehensive suite of tools categorized under identity proofing.
Okay.
The ultimate objective is seamless verification. The sources highlight a specific tool called InstaTouch ID to demonstrate this.
How does that work?
When a consumer, the VIP in your scenario, attempts to onboard for a new service or finalize a transaction, InstaTouch ID doesn't immediately demand manual data entry. Instead, it analyzes the device being used, evaluates the network connection, and cross-references historical data points.
Wow.
It verifies the identity with a high degree of confidence entirely in the background.
So the VIP doesn't feel the pat-down because the pat-down is happening digitally, using the ambient signals the user is already broadcasting.
Exactly. Think about the last time you applied for a store card or an account on your smartphone, and the system somehow populated your details without you manually typing your address. The friction is completely bypassed for the legitimate user.
That is wild.
The friction is held in reserve. You are only presented with a text message verification code or a biometric scan or a knowledge-based question if the background orchestration detects an anomaly.
If you're not acting like the VIP.
Exactly, if the system determines you are not acting like the established VIP. This dynamic friction is also critically applied to a growing threat known as authorized push payment, or APP fraud, through a mechanism Equifax calls authorized payment protection.
Okay, let's define APP fraud quickly for a second.
Yeah.
This isn't a hacker breaking into an account, right?
Yeah.
This is a scenario where a scammer uses social engineering, maybe calling a victim and impersonating the IRS or a bank fraud department, to actively coerce a real person into willingly transferring their own money to a fraudulent account.
Yes. And the profound tragedy of APP fraud is that the legitimate consumer is the one actively authorizing the fraudulent payment. They enter their own correct password. They successfully pass their own biometric facial scan.
Right, because it's really them.
Exactly. To a traditional binary security system, every single checkpoint flashes green. The system says, this is the verified user, the transaction is approved.
Because the system doesn't know there is a criminal on the phone manipulating the user. So how does the VIP bouncer step in here if the VIP is the one handing over the money?
The system pivots to behavioral, biometrics, and contextual analysis. It analyzes the specific manner in which the user is interacting with the platform.
The manner in which they interact. Like what?
Well, is the user hesitating for abnormal lengths of time before clicking? Is the typing cadence erratic or stressed compared to their historical baseline? Are they rapidly moving the mouse in a way that suggests panic or confusion?
Oh, wow. It can track that.
It can.
Yeah.
Furthermore, are they attempting to send a large sum to a newly created cryptocurrency exchange or an unfamiliar overseas account that wildly deviates from their established financial habits?
That makes so much sense.
Right. The Authorized Payment Protection tool flags these behavioral anomalies in real time, injecting friction specifically into that high-risk transaction without interrupting the millions of routine, legitimate payments flowing seamlessly through the network.
It is actively scanning for the digital symptoms of coercion. That is an incredible application of the technology.
It really is.
And the source material provides concrete, measurable proof that this dynamic VIP bouncer approach actually drives business growth rather than suppressing it. There is a detailed case study focusing on a company called Uplogix.
Yes, the Uplogix case study.
From a traditional perspective, you might assume that if Uplogix integrated all this dense Equifax fraud protection and behavioral analysis, their overall transaction approval rates would decline, right? Because the security net is catching more anomalies.
That's the assumption most people make.
But the data reveals the exact opposite outcome.
Yeah, the Uplogix case study is a perfect illustration of the paradox of robust security. When a business lacks a clear, high-resolution picture of exactly who is knocking on their digital door, they are forced into a defensive operational posture.
Meaning they just reject more people to be safe.
Exactly. They must statistically assume that a certain percentage of all incoming transactions are fraudulent. To mitigate that unknown risk, they artificially tighten their overall approval criteria across the board. Consequently, they end up rejecting perfectly good customers, saying no to the VIPs out of a generalized fear of the bad actors.
But the sources show that by implementing real-time identity orchestration, Uplogix didn't see a drop in sales. By significantly reducing the incidence of fraud and synthetic identity infiltration, they actually achieved a 15% increase in approvals.
Because when a system provides absolute real-time confidence that the person on the other side of the screen is exactly who they claim to be, the business can shift from a defensive posture to an offensive one.
Right.
Knowing with certainty who is legitimate empowers the business to say yes with much greater frequency and confidence. A 15% increase in approvals is a massive, transformative metric for any company's bottom line.
They are no longer accidentally rejecting the VIPs. So what does this all mean for the listener? We initiated this deep dive by examining the legacy of the static 3-digit credit score. But what we have ultimately uncovered is an expansive, hidden universe of dynamic, real-time trust.
It's a whole different world.
It really is.
Yeah.
When you interact with the digital economy today, you aren't just presenting a numerical score, you are stepping into a massive, invisible network powered by alternative data, gradient-boosting machine learning, and behavioral biometrics.
Yes.
Every single time you click buy, every time you initiate an account setup, every time you utilize a frictionless BNPL service, this extraordinarily complex machinery is instantly evaluating synthetic identity risks, predicting first-party credit abuse, and seamlessly separating the fabricated ghosts from the verified VIPs.
And if we connect this intricate machinery to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that this invisible shield operates as the foundational layer of our modern digital existence.
Beyond just credit cards, you mean?
Oh, way beyond. The Equifax platforms, detailed in the sources, are not confined to credit card issuers or traditional banks. The material explicitly outlines how these exact same identity orchestration and fraud solutions are actively deployed across vastly different sectors.
Well, that's where.
They are utilized in higher education to rigorously verify the authenticity of student applications and financial aid requests.
Wow.
They're deployed across the telecommunications industry to prevent organized rings from systematically stealing thousands of high-end smartphones.
Oh, that makes sense.
And crucially, they are utilized at the government level to ensure that vital social services, unemployment benefits, and aid programs are securely delivered to the actual citizens who desperately need them, rather than being systematically siphoned off by an automated army of synthetic identities. It is quite literally an ecosystem of trust that allows a digitized society to function safely.
Understanding that invisible ecosystem fundamentally alters how you perceive every interaction in the digital world. Which leads me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. We have thoroughly explored how deeply integrated predictive AI and behavioral analysis have already become in our financial lives. We have seen how systems utilize gradient boosting to predict credit abuse risk and deploy behavioral biometrics to prevent APP fraud in real time, relying on thousands of fluid, constantly shifting data points rather than static history.
Yes.
So, considering the sheer power and accuracy of these real-time systems,
Hmm.
will the traditional numerical credit score that we have all been conditioned to obsess over eventually become entirely obsolete?
It's a fascinating question.
Right. As this B2B machinery continues to evolve and learn, will that static three-digit number simply be replaced by a constant, invisible, highly behavioral digital trust metric that fluidly follows you everywhere you go? It certainly makes you wonder what that giant filing cabinet of a company is going to look like a decade from now.